Hey, I'm Sebastian, and welcome to the Canadian Public Domain. Tonight, I am reading out When Twilight Falls on the Stump Lots by Charles G. D. Roberts. Let's dig in. The wet chill first of the spring, its blackness made tender by the lilac wash of the afterglow, lay upon the high open stretches of the stump lots. The winter-whitened stumps, the sparse patches of juniper, and they just budding, and rough mossed hillocks, the harsh boulders here and there upthrusting from the soil. The swampy hollows wherein the coarse grass began to sow green, all seem anointed, as it were, to an ecstasy of peace by the chrism of that paradisal color against the lucid immensity of the April sky. The thin tops of 5 or 6 soaring rampikes aspired like violet flames. Along the skirts of the stump lots, the fir-wood reared a ragged crested wall of black against the red amber of the horizon. Late that afternoon, beside a juniper thicket not far from the center of the stump lots, a young black and white cow had given birth to her first calf. The little animal had been licked assiduously by the mother's caressing tongue until its color began to show of a rich, dark red. Now it had struggled to its feet, and with its disproportionately long, thick legs, raised wide apart, was beginning to nurse. Its blunt, wet muzzle and thick lips tugged eagerly, but somewhat blunderingly as yet at the unaccustomed teats, and its tail lifted, twitzing with delight as the first warm streams of mother milk went down its throat. It was a pathetically awkward, unlovely little figure. Not yet advanced to that youngling winsomeness which is the heritage to some degree and at some period of the infancy of all the kindreds that breathe upon the earth, but to the young mother's eyes it was the most beautiful of things, with her head twisted far round. She nosed and licked its heaving flanks as it nursed, and between deep ecstatic breathings she uttered in her throat low murmurs unspeakably tender of encouragement and caress. The delicate but pervading flood of sunset color had the effect of blending the ruddy-hued calf into the tones of the landscape. But the cow's insistent blotches of black and white stood out sharply, refusing to harmonize. The drench of violet light was of no avail to soften the staring contrast. They made her vividly conspicuous across the whole breadth of the stump lots, to eyes that watched her from the forest coverts. The eyes that watched her long, fixedly, hungrily, were small and red. They belonged to a lank sea-bear, whose gaunt flanks and rusty coat proclaimed a season of famine in the wilderness. She could not see the calf, which was hidden by a hillock and some juniper scrub, but its presence was very legibly conveyed to her by the mother's solicitous watchfulness. After a motionless scrutiny from behind the screen of fir branches, the lean bear stole noiselessly forth from the shadows into the great wash of violet light, step by step and very slowly, with the patience that endures because of the object confident of its object. She crept toward that oasis of mothering joy in the vast emptiness of the stump lots, now crouching, now crawling, turning to this side and that, taking advantage of every hollow, every thicket, every hillock, every aggressive stump. Her craft succeeded in eluding even the wild and menacing watchfulness of the young mother's eyes. The spring had been a trying one for the lank she-bear. Her den, in a dry tract of hemlock wood some furlongs back from the stump lots, was a snug little cave under the uprooted base of a lone pine, which had somehow grown up amongst the alien hemlocks only to be drawn down by itself at last, by its superior height, the fury of a passing hurricane. The winter had contributed but scanty snowfall to cover the bear in her sleep, and the March thaws, unseasonably early and ardent, had called it forth to activity weeks too soon. Then frost had come with belated severity, sealing away the budding tubers which are the bear's chief dependence for spring diet, and worst of all, a long stretch of intervale meadow by the neighboring river, which had once been rich in groundnuts, had been ploughed up the previous spring and subjected to the producing of oats and corn. When she was feeling the pinch of meager rations, and when the fat which the liberal autumn of blueberries had laid up about her ribs was getting as shrunken as last snow in the thickets, she gave birth to 2 hairless and hungry little cubs. They were very blind and ridiculously small to be born of so big a mother, and having so much growth to make during the next few months, their appetites were immeasurable. They tumbled and squealed and tugged at their mother's teats, and grew astonishingly, and made huge haste to cover their bodies with fur of a soft and silken black. And all this vitality of theirs made a strenuous demand upon their mother's milk. There were no more bee trees left in the neighborhood, and the long wanderings which she was forced to take in search of roots and tubers were in themselves a drain upon her nursing powers. At last, reluctant though she was to attract the hostile notice of the settlement, she found herself forced to hunt on the borders of the sheep pastures. Before all else in life, it was important to her that these 2 tumbling little ones in her den should not go hungry. Their eyes were open now, small and dark and whimsical, their faces quaintly large and inquiring for the roguish little faces. Had she not been driven by the unkind season to do so much hunting and foraging, she would have passed near all her time rapturously in the den under the pine root, fondling those 2 oft miracles of a world. With the killing of 3 lambs at widely scattered points as to mislead retaliation, things grew a little easier for the harassed bear, and presently she grew bolder in tampering with the creatures under man's protection. With one swift, secret blow of her mighty paw, she struck down a young ewe which had strayed within reach of a hiding place. Dragging her prey deep into the woods, she fared well upon it for some days, and was happy with the growing cubs. It was just when she had begun to feel the fasting which came upon the exhaustion of this store that, in a hungry hour, she sighted the she cited the conspicuous markings of the black and white cow. It is altogether unusual for the black bear of the eastern woods to attack any quarry so large as a cow, unless under the spur of fierce hunger or fierce rage. The she-bear was powerful beyond her fellows. She had the strongest possible incentive to bold hunting, and she had lately grown confident beyond her wont. Nevertheless, when she began her careful stalking of this big game which she coveted, she had no definite intention of forcing a battle with the cow. She had observed that cows, accustomed to the protection of man, would at times leave the calves asleep and stray off some distance in their pasturing. She had even seen calves left all by themselves in a field, from morning till night, and had wondered at such negligence in their mothers. Now she had the confident idea that sooner or later the calf would lie down to sleep, and the young mother roam a little wide in search of the scant young grass. Very softly, very self-effacingly, she crept nearer, step by step, following up the wind, till at last, undiscovered, she was crouching behind a thick patch of juniper, on the slope of a little hollow not 10 paces distant from the cow and the calf. By this time, the tender violet light was fading to a grayness over the hillock and hollow, and with the deepening of the twilight, the faint breeze which had been breathing from the northward shifted suddenly and came in slow, warm pulsations of the south. At the same time, the calf, having nursed sufficiently, and feeling his baby legs tired of the weight they had not yet learned to carry, laid himself down. On this, the cow shifted her position. She turned half round and lifted her head high. As she did so, a scent of peril was borne upon her fine nostrils. She recognized it instantly. With a snort of anger, she sniffed again, and then stamped a challenge with her 4 hooves, and leveled the lance points of her horns toward the menace. The next moment, her eyes, made keen by the fear of love, detected the black outline of the bear's head through the coarse green of the juniper. Without a second's hesitation, she flung up her tail, gave a short bellow, and charged. The moment she saw herself detected, the bear rose upon her hind quarters. Nevertheless, she was in a measure surprised by the sudden blind fury of the attack. Nimbly she swerved to avoid it, aiming at the same time a stroke with her mighty forearm, which, if it had found its mark, would have smashed her adversary's neck. But as she struck out in the act of shifting her position, the depression of the ground threw her off balance. The next instant, one sharp horn caught her slantingly in the flank, ripping its way upward and inward, while the mad impact threw her upon her back. Grappling, she had her assailant's head and shoulders in a trap, and her gigantic claws cut through the flesh and sinew like knives. But the desperate disadvantage of a position she could inflict no disabling blow. The cow, on the other hand, though mutilated and streaming with blood, kept pounding with her whole massive weight, and with short tremendous shocks crushing the breath from her foe's ribs. Presently, wrenching herself free, the cow drew off for another battering charge. As he did so, the bear hurled itself violently down the slope, and gained her feet behind a dense thicket of bay shrub. The cow, with one eye blinded and the other obscured by blood, glared around for her in vain. Then, in a panic of mother terror, plunged back to her calf. Snatching at the respite, the bear crouched down, craving that invisibility which is the most fateful shield of the furtive kind. Painfully, and leaving a drenched red trail behind her, she crept off from the disastrous neighborhood. Soon the deepening twilight sheltered her, but she could not make haste, and she knew that death was close upon her. Once within the woods, she struggled straight toward the den that held her young. She hungered to die licking them, but destiny is as implacable as iron to the wilderness people. And even this was denied her. Just a half score of paces out from the lair in the pine root, her hour descended upon her. There was a sudden, redder and fuller gust upon the trail. The last light of longing faded out of her eyes, and she lay down upon her side. The merry little cubs within the den were beginning to expect her and getting restless. As the night wore on and no mother came, they ceased to be merry. By morning they were shivering with hunger and desolate fear, but the doom of the ancient wood was less harsh than its wont, and spared them some days of starving anguish. For about noon, a pair of foxes discovered the dead mother, astutely estimated the situation, and then, with the boldness of good appetite, made their way into the unguarded den. As for the red calf, its fortune was ordinary. Its mother, for all her wounds, was able to nurse and cherish it through the night, and with morning came a searcher from the farm and took it with the bleeding mother safely back to the settlement. There it was tended and fattened, and within a few weeks found its way to the cool marble slabs of the city market. Seb out.